Ethan was beaming. The sun shone brightly in the blue sky, and the gentle afternoon breeze caressed his face as he walked alongside his adoptive parents, Sarah and David. The 12-year-old boy couldn't contain his smile as he looked at the impressive restaurant in front of him. The glass walls reflected the daylight, and the elegantly set tables, with white tablecloths and shiny cutlery, promised an experience he had never had before. It was a special day, a celebration that promised to be memorable. "Are you ready, Ethan? This place is incredible," exclaimed Sarah, his mother, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She had a special way of spreading joy to everyone around her. "I am. I've never been to such a fancy place," Ethan replied, marveling at the hanging lights and floral arrangements that adorned the setting. He remembered previous moments when he dreamed of lunches in restaurants like this, where the food seemed magical and the service impeccable. David, his father, laughed and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You deserve this, Ethan. We are so proud of you. Let's celebrate your achievements and the future that lies ahead." With a gentle gesture, Sarah pulled out the chair for Ethan to sit down. He climbed onto the seat, admiring the luxurious menu in front of him. Their words were almost like a mystery, to be unraveled. "What are you going to choose, Ethan?" David asked as they settled in. "I want to try the pesto spaghetti. It looks delicious," Ethan said, his eyes shining as he read the description of the dish. "Great choice." "I'm going for the chicken parmesan," David replied, while Sarah opted for a light salad, full of fresh ingredients. The atmosphere was light and carefree, as if all the world's worries had been left outside. As they waited for their food, the conversation flowed naturally. Sarah and David discussed Ethan's future, his hopes and dreams. "We're thinking of enrolling him in that prestigious school downtown," Sarah commented, leaning closer to Ethan. "Would you like to study there, sweetheart?" Ethan nodded, a slight blush rising to his cheeks. "Yes, I would love to. I believe I can learn a lot there." David smiled and continued, "You are smart and dedicated, Ethan. If you keep it up, you will surely stand out, and we will be by your side always." The table was filled with laughter and dreams, a bubble of happiness that seemed isolated from the rest of the world. But since Ethan and his family arrived at the restaurant, he noticed furtive glances and whispers among some staff and customers. Initially, he tried to ignore it, but the uncomfortable feeling of being watched began to grow. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted when two police officers entered the restaurant. Ethan didn't pay attention immediately, but his parents' conversation began to dwindle, and he felt a change in the air. The officers, burly men in pristine uniforms, walked towards their table. Ethan felt his heart race. Something about their presence made him uneasy. He tried to ignore the feeling, but it persisted, like a shadow trailing behind him. "Ladies and gentlemen," one of the officers began, with a firm and authoritative voice, "we are investigating a report and need to speak with the boy." Ethan froze, his gaze shifting between the officers and his parents. David immediately stood up, his expression quickly changing from surprise to protectiveness. "Excuse me, but what do you mean by that? Ethan hasn't done anything wrong." The officer looked at David with a mix of disdain and indifference. "That's not your concern, sir. I just need some answers. You can't just come here and—" Sarah began, her voice trembling with indignation. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, his voice shaking. He didn't understand why he was being approached in this manner. He looked at his parents, seeking from them a sign that everything would be all right. The other officer, who seemed more impassive, turned to Ethan. "You are Ethan, right? We received a report about an incident that occurred nearby. We need you to come with us." "This is absurd. He hasn't done anything," David shouted, his face now flushed with anger. "You're just making assumptions based on his appearance." The tension in the air was almost palpable. The surrounding tables began to fill with curious looks, and the vibrant atmosphere of the restaurant was replaced by a heavy cloud of discomfort. Ethan felt shame creeping up his body, as if everyone around him thought he was guilty of something he had no idea about. "Please, we just want to understand what's happening," Sarah insisted, now standing, trying to remain calm, but frustration showing in her voice. "You can't do this without an explanation. Here's just a child." The officers, however, remained firm in their stances, ignoring Sarah's plea. "This is a matter of protocol. We have to follow orders," said the first officer, with a tone that left no room for argument. Ethan wanted to scream, wanted to stand up and run, but his legs felt paralyzed. What was happening? Why had everything changed so quickly? He looked into his parents' eyes, seeking comfort, but found only determination and concern. "You don't have the right to do this," David exclaimed, his voice rising in intensity. "This is an abuse of power. Ethan is not a criminal." The situation was escalating quickly, and Ethan felt a knot forming in his stomach. He wanted it all to be over. He wanted the officers to leave and for laughter and joy to return to the table. But as the words grew louder, it felt as if the daylight was fading, giving way to a darkness he had never felt before. "Let's get out of here, Ethan," Sarah finally said, holding the boy's hand firmly. She looked into his eyes, and Ethan could see the mix of love and concern reflected in her gaze. "Get out! You have nothing to do with this," David shouted, now completely standing, his voice echoing throughout the restaurant. Ethan felt the warmth of tears welling up in his eyes, but he struggled not to let them fall. He didn't want his parents to see that he was scared. He wanted to be strong, just like they always had been. But at that moment, the feeling of helplessness and confusion was overwhelming. He wondered if he would ever escape the shadow of prejudice and distrust that seemed to follow every step he took. The atmosphere around them was becoming unbearable, and as the gazes of other customers fixed on the scene, Ethan realized that this day, which should have been a celebration, had turned into a nightmare. He wished, with all his might, that the situation could change, and that the light of his family's love could shine again, dissipating all the darkness that now surrounded him. After the intervention of the restaurant manager, who approached trying to ease the situation, the police officers reluctantly decided to leave, but not before making it clear that they were keeping an eye on the family. Ethan still felt the weight of shame and humiliation as they left the restaurant. The experience had profoundly marked his view of the world around him. Inside the car, the atmosphere was heavy, almost oppressive. The sunlight that once brightened the afternoon now seemed distant, as if the glow had hidden behind dark clouds. Ethan sat in the back seat, his hands clasped over his legs, his gaze fixed on the window. He watched the trees pass by quickly, the leaves gently swaying in the wind, but none of those images brought comfort. The tumult of emotions he felt inside was more intense than any landscape he could see. Sarah, in the front seat, tried to find the right words. She looked in the rearview mirror and found Ethan's eyes filled with confusion and fear. His expression cut her like a knife. She wanted to hug him, protect him from all the evil the world could offer, but she knew that, at that moment, her words were the only weapon they had. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft but firm. "I just want you to know that we love you. You are perfect just the way you are, and nothing that happened today changes that." The boy averted his gaze, as if those words were not enough to erase the shame and fear that engulfed him. The memory of the police officer's approach was still fresh in his mind, the way they looked at him, as if he were a criminal, as if his skin were a crime in itself. He felt a mix of anger and sadness, but mainly a deep sense of powerlessness. "I don't understand, Mum," Ethan finally replied, his voice choked. "Why did they act like that with me? What did I do wrong?" "What happened was not your fault," Sarah replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Unfortunately, there are people who judge others by their appearance, and that is not fair. You are an amazing boy, and we will fight to make this change." David, who was driving with his hands firmly on the wheel, intervened. "Ethan, what happened is not a reflection of who you are. It is a reflection of a much bigger problem that exists in society, and we will not stay silent about it. We will do our part, so that others do not go through what you went through." His father's words brought a small comfort to Ethan, but he still felt fragile, like a broken vase trying to piece itself back together. He remembered how the police treated him, as if he were invisible, as if his voice did not matter. Indignation grew within him, but at the same time, there was a terrifying fear that his voice truly did not matter. "Are you going to do something?" Ethan asked, finally breaking the silence that hung in the car. "Are you going to tell someone about what happened?" Sarah looked at David, and he nodded, realizing it was time to speak the truth. "Yes, son. We will tell. We will seek help, and we will make people hear what happened to you. We cannot let this go silent." The boy looked out the window again, tears silently streaming down his face. He wanted to believe that his family could really do something, that things could change. But in his heart, there was still a shadow of doubt. The fear of being ignored, of not being taken seriously, followed him like a persistent shadow. "But what if it doesn't work?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. "What if no one cares?" "That won't happen," Sarah asserted, her voice full of determination. "We have to believe that things can change, and more importantly, we have to act. We can't let fear stop us from fighting." David added, "Change begins with small actions." Hi everyone, if you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is super important to us and helps us reach our subscriber goal. Will you join us on this journey? Click the subscribe button and activate the bell so you don't miss any updates. Thank you. We can talk to friends, family, seek support in the community. We are not alone, Ethan. We never were. The car continued on its way, and the city passed by like a blur outside the window. Ethan looked outside, watching the people walking on the sidewalks, oblivious to the internal battle he was facing. He wondered how many of them had gone through similar experiences, how many felt the weight of judgment and discrimination. The idea that he was not the only one in this fight brought a slight relief to his tightened heart. Upon arriving home, the atmosphere was still heavy. Sarah and David tried to create a welcoming environment, but the weight of what had happened still lingered in the air. They sat together on the couch, and David pulled Ethan closer, wrapping him in a tight hug. "You are strong, son," David said, his voice choked. "And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. We will get through this together." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of his parents' embrace. The sense of security he always found there was comforting, but it also reminded him of the fragility of the situation. The fight against prejudice was a difficult battle, and he didn't know if he had the strength to face it. "Mom, Dad," he began hesitantly, I want to help. I want more people to know what happened to me. I want no one else to go through this." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "That's wonderful, Ethan. We can do this together. You have a voice, and it is powerful. Let's use it." "We could make a video or something," David suggested, excited by the idea. "We can share your story and invite others to do the same." The idea began to take shape in Ethan's mind. He imagined other kids, other families, who might feel as lost and alone as he felt at that moment. And what if he could give them the courage he was still trying to find? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I want to do this," he finally said, determination starting to form in his heart. "I want people to listen." Sarah and David exchanged glances, a mix of pride and love. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew that together, as a family, they could face any challenge. The struggle would not be easy, but the hope for change began to shine, like a small ray of sunshine breaking through the dark clouds that seemed to have dominated the afternoon. Ethan smiled at his parents, feeling a new sense of purpose. He was no longer alone in this fight. He had his family by his side, and together they could make a difference. The road would be long, but Ethan's determination grew with every moment. From that day on, he was determined not to let fear and prejudice dominate his life. He would fight for justice, dignity, and above all, for a better future. In the following days, Sarah and David began planning a community meeting, a space where they could openly discuss racism and the need for changes in policing approaches. Around the kitchen table, with a cup of tea cooling nearby, Sarah looked at David and said, her voice firm, "We need to make this happen. If we don't speak up, what happened to Ethan could happen to another child." David nodded, his gaze determined. "Yes, and it's not just about Ethan. It's about all of us. We need to come together and show that we will not accept this injustice." Meanwhile, Ethan watched his parents, feeling a bit lost between pain and the need for action. He didn't want to be the center of attention, but at the same time, he understood that his experience could help others. At school, he had always felt that the color of his skin made him an easy target for teasing and strange looks. Now the idea of sharing his story felt daunting, but also liberating. The night of the meeting arrived, and the community room was decorated with posters that Sarah and David had made, highlighting phrases like "United against racism" and "Our voice, our strength." The chairs were arranged in a large circle, creating a welcoming space for everyone to feel comfortable participating. As the first neighbors began to arrive, Sarah greeted each one with a smile, while David set up a projector to show a video that displayed the incident at the restaurant. "Ethan, are you ready?" Sarah asked, gently touching her son's shoulder. He took a deep breath, trying to control the anxiety that overwhelmed him. "I'm not sure. What if people don't understand?" He looked at the ground, avoiding his mother's gaze. "You don't need to worry about that. What matters is that you speak your truth, and we will be here with you, always." Sarah's words were a balm to his soul, but the insecurity still lingered in the air. When the meeting began, the murmur of animated voices soon transformed into a respectful silence. David positioned himself at the front, his expression serious. "Thank you all for being here. Today we want to discuss what happened to our son, Ethan, and how this connects to a larger issue that affects our community." He paused, and the gazes turned to Ethan, who was sitting between his parents. With an encouraging gesture from David, Ethan felt that it was time to stand up. Nervous, he rose, looking at the crowd of familiar faces. I don't know where to begin," he started, his voice trembling. "But on the day the police came to our table, I felt so small. They didn't know me, didn't know who I was. They just looked at me and decided I was a threat." He swallowed hard, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill down his face. "But that's not true," Ethan continued, more confident as the words flowed. "I'm just a 12-year-old kid who loves playing video games and hanging out with my friends. And that shouldn't matter, but it seems to matter because the color of my skin makes some people see me differently." The silence in the room was profound, as if everyone was absorbing the weight of his words. One of the neighbors, a middle-aged woman named Clara, raised her hand. "Ethan, you are very brave for sharing this. No one should go through something like this, especially in a place that should be safe." Clara's words brought a shy smile to Ethan's face. He felt he was no longer alone. The community's solidarity was beginning to wrap around him like a cozy blanket. David, noticing the change in atmosphere, decided to continue the conversation. "We need to take action. We can't let this go unnoticed. That's why we are thinking about creating a petition to demand changes in policing approaches in our city." The room filled with murmurs of approval. People began sharing their own experiences, stories they had kept for a long time. An elderly man who introduced himself as Mr. Thompson spoke about his youth and how he had faced discrimination in his adolescence. "Things haven't changed as much as we'd like to believe," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We need to fight together so that our children and grandchildren don't go through what we went through." The energy in the room was shifting, and Ethan began to feel that his voice was having an impact. He realized he wasn't just sharing his pain, he was also joining a larger cause. A group of young people, who also felt inspired by what they had heard, stood up to offer help in gathering signatures for the petition. "We can use social media to spread this message," suggested a girl, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I can create a page and share our story. We need people to know what happened. Yes, and we can hold an event in the town square to gather more support," added another young person, clapping his hands. Together, we are stronger." The energy in the room was contagious. Ethan looked at his parents, who were visibly emotional and proud. He realized that despite the fear he felt, there was a strength within him that began to emerge. He was no longer just a victim. He was part of a movement seeking justice and dignity. The meeting stretched late into the night, with ideas buzzing and plans being made. Ethan, now surrounded by friends and supporters, felt a wave of hope that had previously seemed distant. He was no longer alone. The community was rallying around him, and together they were ready to face the challenges ahead. By the end of the night, as community members dispersed, Ethan felt a warmth in his heart. He turned to his parents and with a genuine smile said, "Thank you for making me believe that I can make a difference." Sarah and David exchanged knowing glances, aware that regardless of what happened next, they had taken the first step toward a fairer and more equal future. And, most importantly, Ethan had found his voice. The morning of the public hearing arrived, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Ethan, now with a more mature demeanor than his 12 years, looked out the car window as his parents, Sarah and David, chatted excitedly about what was to come. The sun was shining brightly, but he felt a mix of anxiety and hope that made the day somewhat hazy. "Are you ready, my love?" Sarah asked, casting a loving glance at Ethan through the rearview mirror. Her voice was full of encouragement, but there was a slight tremor that didn't go unnoticed. It was evident that she also felt the weight of the moment. Ethan took a deep breath. "I think so. I don't know what to expect," he replied, his eyes fixed on the street passing by quickly. The memories of the traumatic lunch at the restaurant were still fresh in his mind, and no matter how much he tried to prepare, the fear of reliving that experience haunted him. "Look, the important thing is that we are together. Let's speak the truth and show them that we are not alone," David said, trying to convey confidence through his words. He held Sarah's hand while driving, and Ethan noticed how they supported each other, as they always had. Upon arriving at the community center, which had been transformed into a space for the audience, Ethan felt his heart race. There was a crowd of people, some familiar, some not, all united by a common purpose. He saw school friends and neighbors who had attended the community meeting, all converging for that moment of justice and truth. "Come on, Ethan. It's time to show our strength," Sarah said, gently pulling him out of the car. The presence of the community enveloped him like a warm embrace, and despite his fears, he managed to feel a thread of courage forming inside him. Inside the auditorium, the atmosphere was electric. The speaker's table was filled with city representatives as well as community members, ready to listen and discuss the experiences of those who had faced police brutality. Ethan sat next to his parents, observing the packed space. He could feel the murmur of the crowd, the mix of voices, nervous laughter, and supportive expressions. When it was time to speak, Ethan's heart felt like it wanted to leap out of his chest. He stood up, his hands sweaty, and walked to the microphone. His voice, though a little shaky at first, echoed through the auditorium. "Hi, I'm Ethan. I want to tell you what happened to me," he began, and soon found himself immersed in the memory of that fateful day. He described the feeling of sitting at the table with his parents, the oppression of the police officers' voices, and the fear that overtook him. As he spoke, he realized he was not just recounting a story, but freeing himself from a weight that had been pressing down on him. That day was not just about me. It was about all of us who face prejudice and discrimination. We should not remain silent. His voice grew firm, and he noticed encouraging looks in the audience, people nodding in approval. After Ethan, Sarah, and David shared their experiences, expressing the outrage and pain they felt seeing their son being treated with disdain. The auditorium was silent, everyone attentive, as they spoke about the struggle, the mobilization, and the importance of coming together for change. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the police officers involved in the situation, who had remained silent until then, stood up. He looked nervous, his fingers trembling as he fidgeted with his uniform. The entire room turned to him, and a murmur of confusion swept through the auditorium. I am the officer who approached Ethan that day," he began, his voice low but clear. "And I want to apologize. I was wrong. I should not have treated that boy that way." The silence deepened, the officer's words reverberating in the minds of everyone present. Ethan looked at his parents, who seemed as surprised as he was. The sincerity in the officer's words was palpable, and for a brief moment the room was filled with a mix of disbelief and hope. "I was taught to see things in a wrong way, and now I realize I cannot justify my actions. I hope you can forgive me," the officer continued, tears in his eyes, as the audience began to react. Murmurs of support and applause started to echo through the space, and even Ethan felt his heart warm. The officer's transformation was not something many expected, but it seemed like a glimpse of change. It was an admission of guilt that, although it did not erase what had occurred, opened up space for a deeper dialogue about prejudice and the need to reform police approaches. The audience continued, and news of the punishment of the involved officers began to spread. Many people raised their voices, calling for changes in approach policies and advocating for greater transparency in police actions. The voices united in a clamor for justice, and the room became a space of courage and resilience. By the end of the audience, Ethan felt a weight lifted off his shoulders. He had spoken, and his voice, along with that of his family and the community, had been heard. The strength of unity pulsed in the environment, and he finally felt heard and valued. As they left the auditorium, Sarah and David enveloped Ethan in a tight embrace. "You were amazing, son. We are so proud of you," Sarah said, tears of joy in her eyes. Ethan smiled, feeling stronger than ever. "I just wanted people to know that everyone deserves respect, no matter the color of their skin." He looked at his parents, who nodded, and the certainty that they were in this fight together filled his heart with hope. Ethan and his family's journey was far from over, but that day marked a turning point. They were not just fighting for themselves, but for all those who felt powerless in the face of injustice, and together they knew they could make a difference. So, what did this story make you think about? How many times have you found yourself in a situation where you felt like your voice wasn't being heard? Maybe you haven't gone through exactly what Ethan did, but we all face challenges and moments when it seems like the world is against us. The question is, how do you react to that? Do you shrink back, let fear take over, or do you find the strength within yourself to fight for what you believe in? Ethan and his family's journey is a powerful reminder that no matter how big the obstacle, you always have a choice. You can stay silent, accept the injustices, or you can stand up, make your voice heard, and start the change you want to see in the world. So, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep living the way you have been? Or are you going to take action to change your reality and that of those around you? Life is full of challenges, but it's also full of opportunities to grow and make a difference. The choice is yours. If this story inspired you in any way, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep up with our content. Here, you'll find more stories and discussions that will help you see the world in a new way and prepare for the challenges that lie ahead. And don't stop here. Check out the videos popping up on the screen right now. They'll give you even more insights and tools to take action and transform your life. Watch, reflect, and most importantly, make it happen. The power to change is within you. Let's go on this journey together.